And welcome to a brand new edition of Match Points here on tennismajors.com, the brand new tennismajors.com, as you can see, completely reimagined as we are. Let's meet our panel once again. Say hello, folks. She, the 2013 Wimbledon champion, tennis luminary broadcaster, the lovely Marion Bartoli. He, of course, with a fresh haircut, still in pandemic, but looks like old days, clean in fact. Tennis writer, New York Times, of course, host of the No Challenges Remaining podcast, and writer elsewhere, the illustrious Ben Rothenberg. And finally, you know him as the president of the International Tennis Writers Association, contributor to The Guardian, ESPN, and now, of course, right here at the all-imagined brand new tennismajors.com, Mr. Simon Cambers. All right, panel, welcome aboard. Everybody, make sure you do check out the full site, and you can read bios about everybody as well. The site looks fantastic now. Let's get right at it. This is our Roland-Garros edition, and we are just a few days away from the start of the main draw at Roland-Garros and starting to get a good idea of who's in good form on clay. Question number one, panel, on the men's side. Rafa Nadal beat Novak Djokovic, as we know, in Rome, as was the case at the last Roland-Garros final. The question is, how likely is it that we will see a men's final other than Rafa and the Joker this time around? How likely we'll see a final different then? And let's begin with Ben Rothenberg.
I think it's about 50-50 because there's about a 50% chance they'll be on the same side of the draw. So that's the main obstacle to them playing in the final. It's just them being on the same side of the draw because Rafa's not number 2 this year. Daniil Medvedev is, which is kind of an argument for a sort of Wimbledon-esque clay seeding formula at the French Open, because Medvedev will be the first to tell you that he has no hope of making the French Open final, realistically, with his result and his attitude on clay. So I think these two guys are peaking when it matters most. I think they were absent largely, in both literally absent and also sort of their peak form was absent early in the clay season, and now they're rounding into form late in clay. We've seen Rafa do this many times. I think the next gen is still a ways off, probably, or still has something to prove if they're going to disrupt these two.
Ben, let me press you. Let me press you on something you said earlier. There, you said result versus attitude. What's a bigger problem for Daniil Medvedev? Is it the idea of that I just can't, this is not for me, or literally he can't play it?
I think it's more the attitude. I think that he beat Djokovic in Monte Carlo a couple years ago. So he has had good wins on clay. He's not, he doesn't immediately fall down when he gets on the surface or anything. But his attitude, it's very amusing, and I'm really appreciating him for recently switching his ranting into English during matches. That's been a big help to the TV audiences to really let us in. But yeah, his attitude, if it's anything like it was in Rome, he's not going to last long in Paris, or he's never won a match there.
Fair enough. Marion Bartoli, how likely is it we'll see a final other than Rafa and Djokovic?
Well, as Ben said, of course, it's depending on the draw, and I think Novak will really hope massively that he doesn't draw, obviously, Rafa. But I think that final in Rome was very interesting because even though Djokovic had 2 matches to play the day before, he was still really right there and competing a lot better than what he did in the final for Roland-Garros few months back, just 6 months back. And I think that was a big signal for him just to see that he has a level. And if he goes to a 5-setter, he's right there with Rafa on clay. And I think that was for him the main point, because obviously skipping Madrid and not arriving with a lot of confidence on clay, not doing well in Monte Carlo and Belgrade was for him really a big question mark on whether he will be able this year to still play well on clay. So I think that tournament for him was crucial in his confidence to go in Roland-Garros and knowing he can do it. Aside from that, the other contender, obviously, you can see always a young player coming in. We saw Sinner last year really disturbing Rafa on a set. Why not this year? For him, maybe in an early round, just surprising Rafa. But other than that, it's very difficult to see another final in case they're not in the same side of the draw. What would be very interesting is if they are facing in the semi-final, because then you really have a final before the final. And that mental aspect can play a lot because probably they will know that the one winning this match will have a massive chance to win Roland-Garros. And I really hope we can see that happen.
It all depends on the draw. I think if they're in opposite halves, it'll be a big surprise if they're not in the final. I just think I was doing commentary on half of the matches in last week in Rome, and when you see Nadal digging deep in those difficult situations, I kept thinking, this would be at the end of a third set in Rome. That could be halfway through a Roland-Garros match, and this is where Nadal sort of pulls away. You can match him for a while, often an hour and a half, but you can't do it for long enough to really hurt him. And I think mentally, with beating Novak, when Novak looked pretty strong in that final, will be a big boost for Nadal. But as Marion said, Djokovic looked pretty good too. And having started the season on clay a little bit sluggishly, they're seeing the other possible contenders are all well capable of beating each other on the day. But are they capable of beating Nadal and Djokovic at Roland-Garros? I doubt it.
Yeah, I do think with Nadal's in terms of his superior physicality, we did see that challenge a little bit for the first time, I think, meaningfully in Australia this year, with Tsitsipas outlasting him in 5 sets and actually seeming to be the physically fitter player down the stretch of that match, coming back from 2 sets down. And we saw Tsitsipas obviously win Monte Carlo, and they go really deep with Nadal in that way too long Barcelona final. So I think that, so Tsitsipas is one person I would flag as a potential person who can ride the ride physically with Nadal, even in a Paris type situation, which I don't know that I've really said that about other players before.
Interesting. All right, let's continue. Question number 2. All 3 of the big 3 did skip Miami this year, as we've discussed. Federer skipped all of clay in the Masters 1000. Djokovic, of course, skipped Madrid. Question: just how disrespectful is this to the game and to the fans to be skipping these tournaments? Marion Bartoli, you go first.
Well, it's not disrespectful because when you're planning your year and when you're planning your schedule, obviously, especially for those players, they're aiming to win Grand Slams. And this year, if the Olympics are happening, there is just a lot going on in such small period of time with Roland-Garros, Wimbledon, the Olympics, and the US Open. So when you get into a stage of your career when you're not that young anymore and you have to really peak at the right moment, you can't play a full schedule. That's just not humanly possible for them. They have to be able to have enough rest period to be able to play so many very important tournaments for them and very important results they need to have in order for them to break records or to hold records in that matter. So I don't think it's disrespectful. I think it's just the fact that they're towards the end of their career and they need to really take in consideration the fact that their body just can't play a full schedule.
Simon, same question. Disrespectful to the fans, disrespectful to the game, to which degree, or neither?
Neither. Look at how many Masters thousands they've won between them. It's 100. 36, 36, 28. It's unbelievable the commitment that they've had to the Masters thousands throughout their career. They've never really ditched or sort of ducked and dived. They've never ducked each other, not to any significant extent. So I think, at this stage of their careers, there's absolutely no question that they really can pick and choose as they wish. And why shouldn't they? They're trying to win Grand Slams right now. This is what will put their name in history. Winning a few more Masters thousands would be great, but that's not what they're going to be remembered for. What they're going to be remembered for is whether they end up on top of the all-time Grand Slam list on the men's side. And I don't think you can really criticize them too much for that.
What about in ticketed situations, Ben, where folks saved up or kids asked for their birthday or holidays, I want to go see my favorite player, and then that player decides, I'm just not going to play?
Yeah, that's a big problem for tennis as a product, I think, overall on the tour, and seeing that disconnect. I think we talked about this during Miami when there was such a huge ATP exodus from that entry list before that tournament. It really does undermine the tournament. It doesn't show a lot of loyalty to the event and to the promoters, and it can, especially during these hard COVID times when everyone's struggling financially. On some level, it might be nice to see, the players want to support the tour more and to be out there being more full-time attractions to these events. But that's not really how tennis players think or operate in recent years, at least at all. I mean, they're out there trying to see how can I maximize my own potential to get the goals I want. And increasingly, those goals are only the Grand Slams. I mean, especially for the players we're talking about here, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic. You want to throw Serena in there. I think she fits in that conversation as well. She plays an even lighter regular tour schedule than those guys for a while now. So I think those players have their own different goals, which are all about the slams. And if that's net positive for the sport, I think it's an interesting debate to have. I think it is good they're there on the biggest stages, but them being absent otherwise, I think creates a disconnect between the Grand Slam product and the tour product that probably does undermine the attractiveness of the tour long-term and short-term.
Marion, did you ever feel an obligation to play a tournament that maybe you weren't 100% for because of the fan base or something thereof?
Well, first of all, those tournaments, the Masters 1000 or equivalency on the WTA, are mandatory. So whenever you're skipping them, you're going to be fined. So obviously, the more you're skipping, the more the fee is increasing, and you will have to pay some money back to the WTA. In my case, back to the ATP in the case of the players we have just mentioned. But the problem is, at the end of the day, for a player, you can't be at 100% every single tournament throughout the year. That's just not possible. And the problem is they're so tight and they're so close in those Grand Slam winning, and they want to get the record. One of them really want to stay on top of the other two, that every single Grand Slam is gold, and every single Grand Slam extra win just means so much for them that they absolutely need to peak there. And, your body to get ready for clay is such a huge preparation. You need to increase your stamina. You need to increase your time on the court. And then the switch back to grass court is so short that you have almost to have that preparation before the clay court starts in order for your body to be able to hold during those, two tournaments almost back to back. And that when you get to the late 30s, it becomes more and more difficult. So unfortunately, just the way the schedule is made and the way those tournaments are very close to each other, they're making the right decision. If they don't do that, they will end up coming and running out of gas at some point in the tournaments that matter the most to them, which will be a pity for them. And of course, as well for the crowd, because you want to see a final between those three at some point in order to see who, in a way, is the best out of those three GOATs. So, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to please everyone, but at the end of the day, you're the player. You have to make your own decision, and you have to realize what is really important and what matters the most. And of course, for those players, it's the record in Grand Slam. And of course, as well, the gold medal, the Olympics.
When you think about the way the rules are structured on the ATP Tour, players have to play 8 of the 9 Masters Thousands. But they wrote into the rules a little bit of sort of wiggle room for players if they were, if they played more than 12 years on tour, if they played 600 matches or more, and if they were 31 or more. And I don't think they anticipated that 3 players would play so long at the top in their career that they would be in a position where once you've fulfilled those that criteria, you're able to drop all the commitments. So you can really pick and choose without any kind of penalty. So from their point of view, it's a bit of a no-brainer. They have to do what they think is right. It's a shame for fans, of course it is, but they have committed to it for a long, long time.
Just a couple things on Djokovic specifically, because I think he really made it clear that he was going to lighten up his schedule considerably after he reached that most weeks at number 1 thing, which is going to make him a more part-time sort of player. Still probably a relatively full schedule, certainly more than like Serena, but still not full. And the other thing is also, this is also a factor of the ranking system now, where Djokovic in the last 12 months skipped both the Paris indoors and Madrid, both of which he was defending champion at, I believe, and had no points or got to keep a bunch of his ranking points that wouldn't normally be the case. So some of this absence from him has sort of been set up by the ATP with how they structured these COVID ranking rules.
All right, let's move on to question number 3, and then we'll stay with the idea of playing and not playing. We finally did learn that Roger Federer will in fact play Roland-Garros, but mainly, in his words, to practice before Wimbledon. Now, we've previously discussed Roger's schedule, obviously, on Match Points, but let's do it again in this spot. How can matches on clay prepare him for grass? And Ben, I'm asked to ask you first, because apparently you know best.
Well, I just know that Roger, as they were recording this, both Roger and Serena lost in their small clay tournaments. They entered tournaments they wouldn't normally play. Serena in Parma and Roger in Geneva, and both of them were unable to get the prep they needed to be at their peak form for Paris so far. So it's a question of, is the match prep in Paris potentially worth the possible dent in confidence if you take bad losses there continually? If people haven't seen much of you and the aura starts to fade a bit, if you're taking losses to players like Andahar and Siniakova, who you wouldn't normally be losing to, I think it's a fair question for both those players. So I think both of them really do rely a lot on their mystique and their reputations when they're stepping on court. And Wimbledon, I think it's just a real much better chance for both of them to actually win and contend. And if it's all about adding to that Grand Slam count, then maybe the French Open is not time well spent considering that.
Well, between the 4 of us, we've won exactly 1 Wimbledon singles championship. And so, Marion, you would know best because you're carrying the crew here. Can clay prepare in some way other than?
It's a tough question to answer. It depends of your game and the way you play the game. But I think in the case of Roger and Serena, is just to get something under their belt. You know, it's one thing to practice. It's another thing to feel the stress and the pressure of playing a normal match. And as much, of course, as they have experience and how many matches they have already played, you just still feel that stress when you go into the court and you have to compete. And I just think they want to feel that in their body before they go on their best surface. We obviously both knows and all knows that clay court is probably not going to be where they're going to win, but that can prepare them for the grass just on the mental aspect of being on the court and compete. And as many matches as they will be able to win, the best it will be for them to then be ready to win Wimbledon. And I think they just want to feel that and to feel that stress inside their body to be able to deal with it, because if they arrive on grass just having 6 months of practice, or in that case for Roger, even 6 months, 5 months of practice, and you arrive and you're rusty on the mental aspect, they might lose just because of that. So they want to be sure that they clear that aspect of the focus when that is necessary and required when you enter a match. And then, of course, use their best assets on the grass court when they can shorten the points and come to the net and just hit aces for Serena and Roger and just get to their game when, you know, they just compete so well on this grass court and under their belt. But I don't think they feel that they can just go there and just go to Wimbledon and win it without having something before.
I think it's more, as much as it is getting a few matches before you play Wimbledon or whatever, I think it's as much the ability to train on clay and the effect that has in terms of how many balls you hit, the strength you feel in your legs. Then that's what Federer in particular was looking for as he goes towards Wimbledon. I mean, even after he lost today, he said, somebody asked him about Roland-Garros, he said, well, that's not the goal. The goal is grass. I'm just focused on grass. But, you know, this will build towards that, because he will feel the strength in his legs. You construct rallies, obviously, in a much, much different way on clay. You hit more balls. You feel like you can be out there longer. I think it would have been really hard for Federer in particular after the 2 knee surgeries and the difficulty that clearly he had in getting back in shape and back into a physical state to be able to play at the top level again. I think it would have been hard for him to go straight onto the grass and expect to win. This way, I think he'll feel like he's hit enough balls, done enough work on the court to feel like then he can hit the ground running when the grass comes along.
Simon and I were both in the Federer press conference before the Geneva tournament, where he talked about how this year is a shorter grass lead up than the past couple years, because it's only because Roland-Garros moved back a week. But he was saying that for most of his career, it was only a 2-week grass period. So he's almost more used to this old schedule than the first one. So maybe it affects him, and I guess Serena also. Although Serena never played any grass warm-up tournaments, really, except for very rare occasions. And the other thing I was going to say is that I think the risk you run, obviously, not going for both of them, is that you get injured on clay. It's in a best of 5 or best of 3 or Grand Slam pressure kind of match. And that's a risk you take every time you step on the court, especially when you're 39 years old, you know, and that would be the worst case scenario for one of them, is if trying to peak on clay and then going out and playing this event where both will be very competitive. I mean, neither of them wants to, you know, will go down easily without a fight, you would think, at a Grand Slam match with their pride and everything. So you just sort of worry that they could maybe possibly overextend themselves and just with the physical fragility that they've had relatively in this recent part of their career.
Marion, you want a challenge. Go ahead.
Not really challenge, but just add, I think also for them, it's about finding the focus. And once you have a tournament, and especially Roland-Garros to prepare, I think for them, it's just that goal that can bring them a little bit more into their practice. You put more intensity, you just practice more because you still know you have a Grand Slam to play. And obviously for them, they want to show up and perform well. They just don't want to go there and lose first round. So I think the intensity that we'll be able to put on those practice, even though it's on clay, will help them physically to be in better shape or to feel better within themselves or to feel even more confident about their fitness level when grass comes around. I think if they just go and say, okay, I'm going to practice 1 extra month and there is not really a goal around the corner, it's a lot more difficult to get that motivation every single day. When you still have a Grand Slam to arrive in 10 days time now, it's just a lot easier to get yourself motivated and pumped up. I'm sure they have a motivation, but just that extra bit of stress can help them to really be ready for grass.
All right. And remember, viewers, you can, of course, read more about Roger's return right here on the new revamped tennismajors.com and check out our in-depth coverage courtesy of our own Simon Cambers and the rest of our team. All right, let's move on now to the women's side. Iga Swiatek, she confirmed that she is a tremendous clay player, winning Rome in spectacular and absolutely, completely dominating fashion. But Roland-Garros has been a never-ending surprise, according to our producers, who point out the fact that players have won their first ever slam for the last 5 consecutive years at Roland-Garros. So the question we ask now is, who just might win their first Grand Slam event at Roland-Garros this year? Simon, let's begin with you. Who might get their first and do so at Roland-Garros this time around on the women's side?
I mean, probably the obvious pick is Sabalenka, but then, because of the way she played over the last month or so, when she's on her game, she's a world beater. But the massive question mark is her performances in Grand Slams, which have been, for her ability, poor. She gets very tight, she gets very stressed. Not sure she's ready to win a Grand Slam just yet. But she is the kind of streaky player who can get on a roll. And the same could be said for Pliskova, who I can't believe how well she plays in Rome every year when, for half of the year, she's been doing nothing. I mean, maybe it took her a while to get over injury. She just wasn't in the right place, but she looked pretty impressive until the final. And you've got to wonder how much that will knock out of her confidence. I mean, to be honest, it's hard to see. When you think back to an Ostapenko coming through or a Swiatek, it is hard to see somebody coming out of nowhere this time because there are so many good players now who've won Grand Slams. I mean, maybe it'll be someone who's not won a Roland-Garros, but who's already won a Grand Slam who comes through.
I agree completely with what Simon said, but I still would put Ashley Barty as my favorite just because she retired from Rome. She was tired from all that streak when she won Stuttgart in singles and doubles and then made the final in Madrid. And I think she was just arriving to an end of the roll. But once she gets going and she's physically fit, just her game and the variety just is very difficult for all our opponents to counter that. Just because she can play those slides, she can play those drop shots, and the clay court in Roland-Garros plays completely differently to the lead-up tournaments. It's a lot slower. That's why Rafa has been able, of course, to be so successful all over those years. And I think that slow down pace will help Ashley just to use all her slice and that top spin forehand and the kick serve and everything. And I think for Arena, it will be a lot tougher to eat through players, just like she did in Madrid when it's at altitude and, everything goes so much faster. So I will go with Ashley Barty, but you can see a player like Coco Gauff, for example, being good on clay and can maybe have a breakthrough and start to get into the quarters and the semis, and then you never know. But I think this time around, we will be able to have someone who has won a Grand Slam before and maybe Roland-Garros before to come up on top on this Roland-Garros.
Ben's nonverbals indicate he's got a lot to say and can't wait to say it. And it may be based on some of the Coco Gauff remarks. I'm not sure. Ben, I'm not going to guess. Why don't you tell us based on what Marion just told us?
It's the complete opposite because I was like, okay, I'll say Sabalenka, and then Simon said Sabalenka. I was like, okay, well, I'll say Pliskova, and then Simon threw in Pliskova too. And I was thinking, like, who else can I say?
Taking all your answers.
And then I was thinking, I'll say Coco Gauff, and then Marion said Coco Gauff. So there's no one left original in my thoughts. But I do agree that I think that this is probably going to end the streak, I would guess, this year of first-time champions. I think there's enough between Swiatek and Barty and Halep if she's healthy, and Serena, if you want to throw her in there, maybe is a longer shot. And Osaka, who's won the last 2 Grand Slams, we haven't mentioned her, but maybe she'll have some things come together for her on clay. She's not a favorite there, but I think there's enough players who have a title to their names at this point in women's tennis that probably more likely than not, I would take the sort of slam having won before field over the non-winners as a group.
So what is keeping a player like Sabalenka from just getting on a run and taking over? Because she appears so capable of doing just that. What's keeping her right now from that? Ben, you want to pick that up?
I mean, it's the same thing I think that you could ask the question about, Svitolina or in the old days Wozniacki or Dinara Safina. Like it's a different sort of mental level being at the Grand Slams and having days off in between, having all the attention, the hype. I mean, Sabalenka especially has really won almost all her tournaments away from the spotlight. She's won a bunch of titles, but none of like the most sort of famous tournaments, I think you could probably say. So she's, I think, has a little bit still to prove there. Although I will say she played very well in Australia this year and lost a very tough 4th round match to Serena. She still hasn't made a quarterfinal at any Grand Slam, but that was a very valiant effort that I think would have won against a lot of players in that fourth round day in Australia.
Marion Bartoli, same question. Just real quick, your thoughts on Sabalenka and what's keeping her from a run that she then, substantially takes over for a while.
Well, Arena is a very one-dimension game. She has a plan A and that's absolutely it. So if it doesn't work on that day for a lot of reasons, it can be the conditions. I remember her playing a match in the Australian Open against Carla Suarez Navarro on a very windy day, and she just couldn't adapt. She just was trying to hit the same ball, and it's just not possible when the wind is blowing the ball around. And in a Grand Slam, when you have to win 7 matches in a row, you have to be able to have some sort of changing plans or being able to adapt, to the conditions or to the player in front of you, or just to a bad day, simply. And for Arena, I don't think she has that in her game yet, but she can improve. Obviously, there is room for improvement, and that's probably also with her coach, a path she should take to be able to come up with different plans when she goes on court. That's what Ashley Barty is doing extremely well, for example, I think, from my point of view. But if she gets hot for 7 matches in a row, just like Ostapenko did in 2017, she might as well just come up on top, Ostapenko was hitting almost a lot of unforced errors during a match, but just more winners, and she was able to win Roland-Garros. So if she's on the streak like that, and it's a sunny, not rainy day in Roland-Garros, why not? But I just think that right now she's missing a tiny bit, of tennis, extra tennis, different tennis, to be able to win 7 matches in a row in such difficult mental matches.
I think it's just her mental state when she's in these really stressful situations. Even against Barty, there was a moment where she was up 40-15 on serve. She missed her first serve. Suddenly she's furious with herself, and it's such a giveaway. She's feeling tense. She lets everybody else know. I think there's always going to be somebody who gets enough balls back to cause her to have not her best day, especially in a Grand Slam where she hasn't got past the quarterfinals. And, that's a big step to go from there to winning a slam. I know Swiatek won last year, but she's a different kettle of fish.
All right, we will leave it there for now. Everyone, make sure to check out all of the new revamped tennismajors.com website and brand new additions, as well as bios on our entire panel, all of which we thank here once again. Follow on all platforms of social media. And for the panel, Josh Cohen saying thank you for watching. We will catch you next time for more match points right here on the all-new tennismajors.com.